Alright, in this section I want to spend some time just talking about the different physical, or more, I shouldn't say physical, I should say morphological differences between the different types of muscle tissue. In this one I just want to explain some details about each type of muscle tissue, and then I'll do another video right after this about, I'll have some images or pictures of the different types of muscle cells that are in the body, so you can see these differences that I'm discussing. Okay. Now, when it comes to muscle, again, there are three histologically different muscle tissues. Now, remember when I say histologically because that's how we really define the differences between tissues of the body. We have to look at the histology of the tissue, put the tissues under a microscope, and look at the morphological, i.e., the physical characteristics of the cells, and look at the extracellular matrix. What do you notice about the environment surrounding the cells? Okay, and that's how you determine, what type of tissue the type of tissue is by looking at it. All right. So when it comes to muscle, again, you have to look at a few different properties, like with any other area of histology. You have to look at the cells. You have to look at the size and the shape of the cells. All right, the size and the shape of the cells is a big identifying marker. Okay, and again, you have to look at the environment that the cells are in. The big thing you're looking at here with muscle cells is besides the shape of the cells, you're looking at how much space is in between the cells. Okay, not just the length and shape of the cells, but how much space is there in between. Keep that in mind. Okay, so first, if we want to kind of look at these three different types of muscles, okay, cardiac and skeletal muscle are quite similar in a few different ways, whereas smooth is kind of out there in terms of its physical looks. Okay, for starters, skeletal and cardiac muscle is striated. Okay, when I say striated, I mean if you look at the tissue underneath the microscope, you're going to see these alternating light and dark patterns. It's basically the sarcomeres, the functional contractile units of the muscle, which I'll talk about later on. Okay, but because of the protein makeup, the makeup of the filaments within those sarcomeres, there's arrangements of thick, thin, thick, thin, thick, thin proteins. All right, and then how they're arranged makes the darker areas are more concentrated areas of the thick filaments, and the lighter areas, the lighter colors, are more either the thin filaments or the combination of the two. Okay, because of how they overlap one another. And again, I know you'll see. I'll show you some images of that in a little bit. Okay, so skeletal and cardiac muscle is striated. You see light and dark, light and dark, light and dark bands along the cells. Smooth muscle is non-striated. Smooth muscle has slightly different contractile mechanisms than these other two types of muscles. That's why we call it smooth muscle, because the cells have a very smooth-like appearance underneath the microscope. Okay. Now this is a big one, is voluntary control. Okay, and this isn't a physical characteristic you can see. All right, but this is a physiologic characteristic that you can easily see and test. Okay, skeletal muscle is the only one that's voluntary. Okay, when I say voluntary, I mean conscious control. Okay, you can consciously plan a skeletal muscle movement. I mean, just me talking right now, me doing all the crazy gestures I always do whenever I talk, that is a planned movement. Okay, I'm consciously, intentionally moving my muscles in that fashion. Okay, you guys notice that I like to walk around a lot as well. I can't sit still for more than 2 seconds at a time. All right, so that is, I'm voluntarily controlling those skeletal muscles. Okay, now don't get me wrong, there is involuntary aspects of this as well. The nervous system does make muscle, it can stimulate muscles to twitch and to undergo certain types of reflexes. Okay, but we do have conscious control over skeletal muscle as well. All right, like when I play table tennis and I want to do a forehand. Okay, I plan that movement. Okay, I plan that movement out. Sometimes reflexes, but you get the picture here. Okay, cardiac muscle is involuntary. You do not consciously, you don't on a regular basis, I should say, consciously control and regulate your heartbeat. Okay, I know through meditation or reducing stress or taking a deep breath, you may slow down your heart rate. Okay, but that's something that takes a lot of concentration, and you don't really have any conscious cardiac centers. Okay, the reason why that's happening is because you're lessening the stress on the brain, the stress on your physiology. Okay, and overall, that's, you're lowering, as you lower stress, your heart rate's going to go down because of how you involuntarily regulate blood pressure. Okay. So like I said, that's, still unconscious. And smooth muscle as well, you don't consciously regulate smooth muscle activity. You don't sit there and say, all right, I'm standing up, I have to die, I have to constrict the blood vessels on my legs so gravity doesn't pull all my blood down. Oh, I just ate some food. I need to think about, okay, how long exactly does that bolus of food need to sit in my stomach, and then how fast am I going to move it through my intestines so I absorb food right? You don't do that. Okay, it's all unconsciously regulated by the autonomic nervous system. All right. Now, if we want to look at the cellular aspects of these cells, one of the things you'll look at with any cell when you're trying to understand histology is the nucleus. Okay, the size and the shape of the nucleus. Okay, or in this case, the amount of the nucleus. Okay, skeletal muscle cells are multinucleated. Okay, they have many nuclei per cell. Okay, whereas cardiac and smooth muscle are uninucleated. They have one nucleus per cell. Okay, now another thing you look at is the length of the cells. Okay, by far skeletal muscle cells are the longest. Okay, now remember, as you're learning about muscle and muscle terminology, when you're talking about skeletal muscle, there's three parts: origin, and insertion, and the belly. Okay, the belly of the muscle is the meat of the skeletal muscle. Like the meat that you eat, the meat that you use for movement. The origin and the insertion are just fixed points of that muscle. They're tendons. Okay, when I say fixed, meaning they're attached to something. They're attached to the bones in different locations. Okay. So basically, the cells of skeletal muscle, like I said, they're very long. They run the entire length of the belly. Okay, so you got your sartorius muscle, travels almost practically the entire length of your thigh. Okay, so those muscle cells are about the length of your thigh. They're very long. Okay, they're very long. If you look at your bicep muscle in your arm, okay, when you look at the meat, the belly of that muscle, those cells are the length of that muscle. Okay, so these are by far the longest. All right. And then cardiac and smooth muscle cells are very short. Okay, but one of the big differences though is cardiac muscle cells are short and branched. All right, whereas smooth muscle cells they're just kind of long and they're long and thin. Okay, they don't branch out in different directions. All right, so keep that in mind. And then last but not least, if you look at how they're organized between these, I would probably say smooth muscle is the most tightly arranged of these, because you find smooth muscle in either maybe a couple layers or maybe one layer, or you find them in many layers of cells. Okay, but smooth muscle forms sheets. Okay, you find sheets of smooth muscle surrounding hollow organs of the body, like blood vessels, or the pupil of your eye, or your GI tract. Those sheets of muscles, those sheets of packed cells, again, contract and relax to control the diameter of those hollow organs. All right. Cardiac muscle is probably the most widely spaced of these. There's a lot of space in between cardiac muscle cells, and we'll talk more to that in a little while. And then when it comes to skeletal muscle, it's kind of in between. Okay, it is fairly tightly organized, but there is space in between these cells as well, especially when you compare it to the smooth muscle. All right, and then filling the spaces. Bear in mind, wherever there's space, there's connective tissue. That's why connective tissue, the job of that is, it's a sticky tissue that adheres cells and tissues together. Okay, but connective tissue also fills spaces. All right, so when we say there are spaces in between these muscle cells, it's occupied by sticky connective tissue, which is good because that just helps to secure the cells in their location and keep the tissue a little more organized. Okay, now, like I said, now that we've kind of talked about these characteristics, let's look at some images to go with these.